She resumed her old mode of dressing, exposing her sexy cleavage as she liked. When she was not being cruel, Ecot would pretend to care for Jeffrey. She would prepare his meals and perform her duties, all the while whispering assurances that this was their little secret. She moved quietly, sneaking through the hallway in the cold night, tiptoeing toward Jeffrey's room, her heart pounding in her chest. She was just a few steps away when suddenly, out of the shadows, Mrs. Reeby appeared. Mama Demi was fast asleep in the tiny maid's room of the sprawling mansion where she worked, battling an illness that had finally forced her to take a short rest. But her peace was fleeting. Her sleep was abruptly interrupted by a voice, her name echoing up from the stairs. Mama Demi, the angry voice snapped. Why haven't you done all I asked you to do? Fear gripped her, and Mama Demi jolted awake, her heart pounding. Her madam had returned, and she hadn't done a single chore. The house was still a mess. Struggling to shake off the sleep, she braced herself for the scolding. But as her eyes fluttered open, she realized, thankfully, it was only a dream. Oh, thank God, she muttered, sinking back into the pillow. She needed this rest. Her illness was growing worse, and the demands of the job were more than her fragile body could handle. But then, that dreaded voice called again. Only, this time, it wasn't a dream. Mama Demi. The door flung open, revealing Mrs. Reeby standing in the doorway, fury in her eyes. You didn't do any of the chores. The whole house is upside down. This is getting out of hand, she fumed. Mama Demi, still weak from her fever, immediately began to beg. I'm so sorry, little madam. My body just couldn't go on. I had to take a short nap. Mrs. Reeby, arms crossed and foot tapping impatiently, was unimpressed. These naps of yours are keeping the house in chaos. If this continues, I'll have to find someone new. Panic washed over Mama Demi. She pleaded earnestly, promising she would get better, that she wouldn't let it happen again. But there was no time to dwell on it. Sick or not, she had to get back to work. Mama Demi, in her sick state, got up and resumed all her duties for the day, though her fever was high and she was in pains. As Mama Demi dragged herself to the backyard, preparing to wash the pile of dirty laundry, she caught the eye of Jeffrey, Mrs. Reeby's only son. His face lit up with excitement on seeing Mama Demi. He definitely was going to rush downstairs to join her. Jeffrey was the one and only son of the madam of the mansion, Mrs. Reeby. He was as bright as the sun, so handsome and cute, a child that made heads turn whenever he walked by. But Jeffrey's life wasn't as perfect as it could have been, because though he could hear perfectly well, Jeffrey was mute. He had never spoken a single word, all his life. His silence cast a shadow over the otherwise golden life of a rich and handsome boy. From the outside, it looked like Jeffrey could have been the luckiest child in the world, but then his life wasn't so perfect after all, though his heart was pure and he had the soul of an angel. Seeing Jeffrey was like medicine for Mama Demi's aching body. "Oh, my handsome little master," she said with a smile. "Don't worry, I can handle this." But Jeffrey was already making signs with his hands, insisting that he would help her. This was one of his favorite things to do, laundry with Mama Demi. It was the only time he got to spend with someone who felt like a mother to him. Though his biological mother, Mrs. Reeby, loved Jeffrey with all her heart and soul, work did not give her the freedom to spend any amount of time with her only son. Mrs. Reeby had turned an overnight workaholic after her husband died 5 years ago, leaving the responsibility of running a business empire with over 3,000 staff to her care. The burden was too much on Mrs. Reeby's shoulders. It all hit her like an iceberg, the death of her beloved husband and the responsibility of keeping the business afloat. She was so consumed with keeping her husband's dream and legacy alive. She was working hard for the company and also working hard to make sure she did all it took to get her only son Jeffrey cured from his disability. Mrs. Reeby had been visiting the hospital, working with a specialist to find a solution to Jeffrey's dumbness. The doctor had informed her they had found a way. An operation could be conducted that would help restore Jeffrey's ability to speak again, but the chances were slim, and it was a 50-50 thing. Mrs. Reeby's joy knew no bounds on hearing that a means and a possible cure had been found for her son's illness. They had fixed the date for Jeffrey's surgery, and Mrs. Reeby told no one about it as she prepared quietly and prayerfully towards that day. She made sure she had the money and every other thing ready that Jeffrey would be needing on his journey to recovery. But, in between running the business and trying to find a cure for Jeffrey's condition, Mrs. Reeby had all but lost touch with her only son. Showering him with expensive gifts every now and then was not enough to replace the love and attention Jeffrey craved from her. While Mrs. Reeby worked tirelessly to keep the company from collapsing, she did not realize that it was her relationship with Jeffrey that was crumbling right in front of her. And though she did not see things as they were, Mrs. Reeby was going to learn from the results of her choices, but in a very harsh way. Jeffrey's daily consolation was the precious time he spent with Mama Demi. To him, she wasn't just a maid. She was his friend, mother, sister, and nanny, all wrapped into one. Though mute, Jeffrey's sadness was always easy for Mrs. Demi to read. He craved his mother's attention, and although he couldn't voice this longing, Mama Demi always sensed it. She would soothe him with warm hugs and enchanting folk tales, reminding him gently, "Don't worry, little master. You never have to feel lonely as long as I am here with you." Jeffrey would nod, comforted, and the weight of his loneliness would ease in her arms. His world was small and quiet. His only means of communication was through sign language, which his teacher came to teach him once a week. Jeffrey had never stepped into a school or mingled with other children his age. His world was limited to the kind faces of Mama Demi, his sign teacher, and the rare sight of his mother, Mrs. Reeby, whenever she managed to be home, though those moments were few and fleeting. But things had begun to change. In the recent weeks at the sprawling mansion, whenever Mrs. Reeby returned late at night, the house would be in disarray, dishes still piled high, floors unswept. Mama Demi was now seriously ill, her strength failing to keep up with the once routine tasks. As the days went by, Mrs. Reeby found herself scrubbing dishes at midnight, picking up after a long day of work. The exhaustion of managing the mansion, her son's care, and the demands of her business empire began to weigh heavily on her. It was too much. She held on for months, struggling with the routine, but the pressure eventually became unbearable. One Sunday, the inevitable happened. Mrs. Reeby called Mama Demi, who was weak from her illness and heavily medicated, into the sitting room. She took a deep breath, unable to meet Mama Demi's gaze as she spoke the words she dreaded. "Mama Demi, I have to let you go." The words hit like a hammer. Mama Demi's eyes welled up with tears as she listened, her hands trembling slightly. She had served this family for over 50 years, cared for Mrs. Reeby's late husband, and now devoted herself to their son, Jeffrey. Her illness had changed everything. "Where do you want me to go, madam?" Mama Demi asked in a voice filled with sorrow. "I have no life outside of this home. All I've ever known is this family, and my little master. How do I leave him? I've been with him since the moment you brought him into this world. How can I leave him now?" Mrs. Reeby's voice broke as she responded, holding Mama Demi's fragile hands. "I don't want to do this, Mama. But your illness, it's not getting better. I'm asking you to go home to the village and rest. I'll continue to pay all your bills, and we'll stay in touch, I promise. I know how much you love Jeffrey and how much he loves you, but this workload is too much. If I collapse, everything will crumble. You need to get better, and I need to survive for both of us." Mama Demi, her heart heavy, understood the weight of the situation. Though she didn't want to leave, perhaps the village was where she needed to be, to heal. She agreed, her voice quiet with resignation, knowing that Mrs. Reeby's decision, painful as it was made out of necessity. Yet as she took her first steps away from the mansion, from the home she had dedicated her life to, the pang in her heart was unbearable. Her thoughts weren't on herself or even her illness. They were on Jeffrey. She worried endlessly about him. Who would care for him now? Would they have the patience, the love that he so desperately needed? As Mama Demi made her way to the village, her silent prayer was that someone with a heart as kind as hers would come into Jeffrey's life, someone who could love and protect him as she had. Jeffrey stood on the balcony, watching through tear-filled eyes as Mama Demi's taxi pulled away. His only friend, his only true companion, was leaving for good. He wanted to call out, to beg her not to go, but his mute voice remained locked inside him. The words he longed to say, "Please stay," were trapped in his heart, and as the taxi disappeared down the road, Jeffrey's heart sank deeper. He didn't even get to say goodbye. The house felt empty after Mama Demi's departure, and Mrs. Reeby wasted no time in seeking a replacement. Desperate and overwhelmed, she placed a call to Madame April, a fellow businesswoman she had befriended at the airport on a trip years before. Though they came from different industries, their shared experiences as wealthy, working women had forged a strong bond between them. Madame April, successful and polished, was running a popular clothing line and had mentioned to Mrs. Reeby that she always had a league of village girls who worked for her. This was the lifeline Mrs. Reeby needed. Speaking hurriedly, Mrs. Reeby pleaded with Madame April to help her find a good, hard-working girl to replace Mama Demi. She emphasized how desperate she was, and Madame April, ever the composed friend, assured her not to worry. She had the perfect girl in mind. But Madame April's world was not what it seemed. As she hung up the phone in her luxury store, she stood, lighting a cigarette, and moved towards the back, the inner chambers of her empire. Behind the facade of high-end fashion was the real source of her wealth, a hidden brothel where the girls she brought from the villages were forced into prostitution. It was a well-guarded secret, one that had made Madame April rich beyond measure. Years ago, she had started as a prostitute herself, hunting down wealthy men and trading her body for money. She had risen through the ranks, eventually establishing her own business, cloaked under the disguise and respectability of a clothing line. But this dark underworld was where her true fortune lay. Among her latest recruits was a girl named Ikote, newly brought from the village of Calabar. Ikote, though experienced in the prostitution trade, had become a problem for Madame April. She wasn't bringing in the money expected of her. For reasons no one could quite understand, men avoided her. There was something about Ikote that repelled them, and this had turned her into dead weight for Madame April's operation. With Mrs. Reeby's call, Madame April saw an opportunity, a perfect way to offload Ikote. "Ikote," Madame April called, summoning the timid girl into the room. "You're going to Madame Reeby's house to work for her. You know how to cook and clean, right? At least you can be useful there." Her voice was sharp and commanding. "Listen to me carefully," she continued, glaring at Ikote. "Don't go there and mess up. What did I say?" Ikote, her heart pounding with fear, nodded and repeated softly, "Don't go there and mess up." Relief and fear warred inside Ikote. She had felt Madame April's growing disdain and had long suspected that she would be sent back to her village, a fate she dreaded. The idea of returning to the harsh poverty of her home filled her with dread. But this opportunity, though terrifying, was at least better than the village. She bowed her head, obedient and fearful, as Madame April continued to bark orders. The hope that this new place, Madame Reeby's home, would offer a fresh start flickered dimly in Ikote's heart as she prepared to leave behind the life she was used to and the one she had known under Madame April's harsh rule. The very next day, Ikote made her way to the new estate where Mrs. Reeby's mansion stood. Walking in with wide-eyed wonder, she was struck by the sight of beautiful, elegant buildings, each more grand than the last. It felt like she had wandered into a dream, a paradise she couldn't have imagined. When she entered Mrs. Reeby's mansion, it took her breath away. This was her new home. Mrs. Reeby welcomed Ikote warmly, putting her at ease. Nervously, Ikote bowed her head and said in a soft voice, "My name is Ikote, ma." She barely managed to get the words out. Mrs. Reeby smiled and quickly got to the point, explaining Ikote's new responsibilities as the house's caretaker. She emphasized the importance of the role, particularly when it came to looking after her son, Jeffrey. Mrs. Reeby called for Jeffrey to introduce him, explaining his condition and stressing how much he needed care and love. "If you want to keep your job," she said firmly, "you will need to treat him as your own." Ikote looked at Jeffrey, her eyes scanning the boy, trying to make sense of his silence. Such a handsome boy, she thought. What a shame he cannot speak, she mused quietly, though her expression remained blank. Snapping her back to reality, Mrs. Reeby addressed her again. "You'll need to change out of this revealing outfit. You cannot dress like this around my son. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma. I'm so sorry, ma," Ikote responded quickly. "I don't have many clothes, but I will change immediately." And so Ikote's new life in Mrs. Reeby's home began. The following night, when Mrs. Reeby returned late from work, she was greeted with a pleasant surprise. The entire house sparkled. Every surface, from the sitting room to the kitchen, was spotless. Mrs. Reeby inspected Ikote's work and found nothing out of place. Everything was in perfect order. She checked on Jeffrey and found him fast asleep, neatly tucked into bed, already dressed in his pajamas. And to top it all off, a hot, delicious meal was waiting for her at the table. Mrs. Reeby was impressed. It was the first time in months that she'd been able to come home and simply relax. Ecot had exceeded her expectations. She was certain she had made the right choice. Ecot was efficient, hardworking, and knew exactly how to run the household. But perfection has a way of slipping, and Ecot's flawless dedication wouldn't last forever. As the days went by, something darker lurked beneath her polished exterior. The facade would only hold for so long. Soon, Ecot's true nature and the secrets she carried would rise to the surface. Time was ticking, and with it, the unraveling of her carefully crafted persona would soon, inevitably spring to the surface. It all started one fateful night. As Ecot lay on her bed, sleep eluded her, and the uncontrollable urges began. Ecot had a deep, dark secret, a disorder Mrs. Reeby knew nothing about. Outwardly, Ecot appeared to be an ordinary young woman, but inside, she harbored an overwhelming addiction to sexual fetishes, a habit she indulged in during her time at Mrs. April's prostitution house. Tonight, those urges were unbearable. It had been ages since Ecot had been touched by a man. Her life in Mrs. Reeby's house meant isolation from the freedom she once had to engage with anyone. This was a struggle for Ecot, whose desires had become overwhelming. The men at Mrs. April's establishment had rarely chosen her. This had kept her inner longing building up for the longest time, and now she felt starved. As she lay in the dark, her body shivered, yearning for the touch of a man. The longing had grown too strong, and then a twisted thought crept into her mind. Jeffrey. What if I don't have to be cut off from everything after all? Ecot thought to herself. Jeffrey is right here, and no one would ever know. Her pulse quickened at the thought, but she hesitated. What if I get caught? But then she reasoned, Mrs. Reeby would be far too tired to leave her room, and Jeffrey, well, he couldn't speak. He wouldn't be able to tell anyone. The idea planted itself deeper, and with shaky determination, Ecot got up from her bed. She knew the risk, but her desires overpowered her caution. She moved quietly, sneaking through the hallway in the cold night, tiptoeing toward Jeffrey's room, her heart pounding in her chest. She was just a few steps away when suddenly, out of the shadows, Mrs. Reeby appeared. Ecot's heart nearly stopped. She froze in fear, her breath caught in her throat as Mrs. Reeby looked at her in confusion. Ecot, what are you doing here? Mrs. Reeby asked, her eyes narrowing in concern. Stammering, Ecot scrambled for an excuse. Ma, I was looking for the toilet. I need to pee. Mrs. Reeby raised an eyebrow. But there's a toilet in your room. You don't need to come out here. Oh yes, I forgot, Ma, Ecot stammered, forcing a nervous smile. I'm not used to it yet. I thought I'd use the one in the guest room. I won't forget again. Mrs. Reeby shook her head, smiling a little. Oh, silly you. Don't be forgetting things like this. I was feeling a bit restless tonight, so I went to sleep in Jeffrey's room for a while. He's fast asleep, and I don't want anything waking him up. Now go back to your room. Relieved but shaken, Ecot quickly nodded and hurried back to her room, her mind racing. That was close. Too close. She had nearly ruined everything. As she lay back down, she tried to shake off the encounter, trying to return to her innocent facade. In the weeks that followed, Ecot worked hard to suppress her urges, battling the dark thoughts that surfaced every time she saw Jeffrey walk by or attended to him. She knew one misstep could destroy her new life, and for a while, it seemed she was managing to keep her demons at bay. Until a time came when Mrs. Reeby had to leave on a long business trip. Before she left, she called Ecot to her bedroom and gave her most of her unused expensive clothes. You said you didn't have much clothes to wear, so I thought to give you this, Mrs. Reeby said, smiling at Ecot. Ecot blushed and thanked her madam. No one had ever been kind to her this way before. Mrs. Reeby begged Ecot to take good care of Jeffrey and report everything that was going on in the house to her while she was away. Ecot told her everything was under perfect control and she had nothing to worry about. On that note, Mrs. Reeby was relieved. After saying goodbyes to her son the very next day, Mrs. Reeby left for her travel. She told her son Jeffrey that on her return, they would be visiting the hospital and pleaded with him to stay healthy for her until she returned. And with that, Mrs. Reeby made her leave, leaving everything under Ecot's care. After Mrs. Reeby left the house, Ecot was left with more freedom to do whatever she pleased. She resumed her old mode of dressing, exposing her sexy cleavage as she liked. She was the new madam of the house, and one faithful night it started again. Ecot's fetish urges. This time there was no one at home, no one to watch Ecot's actions, and because of this, it became even more difficult for Ecot to control her lustful desires. She had all the freedom and all the time in the world. No one was watching, no one would stop her, and better yet, no one would ever know. It started with Ecot watching Jeffrey as he slept on his bed each night. His handsome face, red lips, and sharp jawline mesmerized Ecot as she wondered how a boy could be so fine. Was it love or was it lust that pulled her to Jeffrey? Was it his innocence or the mere fact that she knew he could not speak, and she could do whatever she liked with him without ever being caught? She wasn't sure, but whichever it was, Ecot was going to have a taste of Jeffrey and do away with the urges she could not control. One faithful afternoon, Ecot came into Jeffrey's room as he sat on his bed. Ecot began to take off her clothes, leaving herself bare before the little boy. She came in with whips and instruments, and she was going to practice her fetish on Jeffrey. Whenever Jeffrey refused to do what Ecot wanted, she used the whip so hard on him until he obliged and did whatever she asked him to. Jeffrey had to submit, and the awful things Ecot did to him daily were unthinkable. As the days passed, Jeffrey grew more withdrawn. His silent world had always been one of loneliness, but now it had become a place of fear. Each time Ecot entered his room, his heart would race, and he would instinctively pull away. He wanted to escape, to cry out, but his voice, stolen from him since birth, left him trapped in a silence that Ecot used to her advantage. The boy's helplessness was her shield, and she knew it. When she was not being cruel, Ecot would pretend to care for Jeffrey. She would prepare his meals and perform her duties, all the while whispering assurances that this was their little secret. Jeffrey, too afraid and confused to understand why someone who was supposed to care for him would act this way, found himself sinking deeper into isolation. The walls of his room became a cage, and the hours when Ecot would leave him alone became the only moments of peace he knew. Meanwhile, Mrs. Reeby remained oblivious to the horrors unfolding in her absence. She trusted Ecot with the care of her son, unaware that the person she believed to be a loyal caretaker was abusing that trust. Jeffrey's inability to communicate what was happening only added to his torment. Jeffrey had never desired to speak so bad in his life. He needed to make a call, an urgent call. Dialing his mother's number, Jeffrey held the phone against his ears. "Hello, hello," Mrs. Reeby's voice echoed through the phone. "Can you hear me, Ecot? Is that you?" Who was on the line? But there was silence. Jeffrey could not speak. "Mum, please come and save me," were the mere words Jeffrey could not get out of his fragile lips. He just held the phone, standing there sobbing silently. At night, Jeffrey would cry in his bedroom, his mind clouded with confusion. He longed for the comfort of Mama Demi, who had always made him feel safe. Now, he felt nothing but cold fear. The scars left by Ecot were not just physical. They were deep wounds in his soul, shaping his view of the world. The abuse continued for weeks without no one knowing. Mrs. Reeby finally returned from her trip. "Ecot, how are you? Hope you took good care of our home in my absence." "Yes, Ma. Everything is just the way you left it," Ecot replied her madam. Mrs. Reeby quickly went to her son Jeffrey and gave him a very long hug. As Ecot left to prepare supper for Mrs. Reeby, Jeffrey tried signaling Mrs. Reeby. He tried to tell her of Ecot and all that she had done to him, using his hands to make his sign language. But Mrs. Reeby could not understand him. She had never taken her time to learn the sign language alongside her son. She was always too busy, and at this crucial time, she did not get the message her child was trying to pass to her. A few more weeks passed, and it was time for Jeffrey's surgery. Mrs. Ecot joined her son at the hospital. After a successful operation was done, she held Jeffrey's hand on his hospital bed. She consoled her son, who couldn't stop crying. Mrs. Reeby had thought Jeffrey was crying because of the pains he was feeling from the surgery. As Jeffrey lay on the hospital bed, tears streaming down his face, the weight of months of silent suffering finally broke free. His voice, shaky and weak from disuse, fought its way through the pain. "Auntie Ecot," he said, barely a whisper at first. Mrs. Reeby leaned in closer, her face filled with confusion, unsure of what her son was trying to say. "Jeffrey, honey, what is it? Is it the pain from the surgery?" she asked gently, wiping his tears. But Jeffrey shook his head, and with great effort he said the name again, louder this time, Auntie Ecot. At that moment, a chill ran down Mrs. Reeby's spine. She had no idea what was coming, but the look in Jeffrey's eyes told her it was something terrible. Through broken sentences and sobs, Jeffrey began to speak. His words, though few, carried the full weight of his trauma. He told his mother about the nights Ecot had entered his room, the things she had done to him. Each word seemed to drain him of more energy, but he kept going, finally able to release the secret that had been tormenting him for months. Ecot had been fondling with his. Mrs. Reeby sat frozen, her heart sinking with every word. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The woman she had trusted to care for her son, the woman she had welcomed into her home, had been abusing her child in the most unimaginable way. Mrs. Reeby ran to her computer, looking through the CCTV footage. There she saw Ecot sneaking through the corridor each night. Her fears were founded. It was real. Her son was telling the truth. Mrs. Reeby's heart sank to the ground. How did I not know? She whispered to herself, tears welling up in her eyes. She thought of all the times Jeffrey had tried to communicate with her through his sign language, the times he must have wanted to tell her, but she was too distracted by her own life to see the signs. The reality of her absence crushed her. Her focus on work, her failure to learn sign language, her reliance on others to care for her son, all of it had left Jeffrey vulnerable. How could the sweet Ecot she knew do that to her son? Checking through her child's body, Mrs. Reeby saw the marks from the whips, confirming all that Jeffrey had managed to tell her about Ecot. Mrs. Reeby's world shattered. What on earth had she brought into her home? What had she done to her son? She was going to get to the bottom of it, and Ecot was going to pay dearly. 3 weeks passed, and Ecot struggled to control herself, now that Mrs. Reeby was around. But the temptation gnawed at her, and she rationalized her actions. So long as she wasn't caught red-handed, what was there to lose? That fateful night, as Mrs. Reeby slept, Ecot slipped into Jeffrey's room again. As she began to undress, Jeffrey, with tears streaming down his face, signaled for her to stop, pleading silently. His cries were louder now, desperate. Ecot had left her whip behind, fearing the noise would wake Mrs. Reeby, but she persisted, urging Jeffrey to be quiet. To her utter shock, Jeffrey cried out, "Mum!" Ecot froze, disbelief flooding her. Jeffrey could speak. Before she could react, Mrs. Reeby rushed out of the closet where she had been hiding. For days, she had been sleeping in Jeffrey's room, knowing that sooner or later, Ecot would come again. When she heard Ecot's footsteps approaching, she hid in the closet, waiting. "You, Ecot, so this is what you've been doing to my son." Mrs. Reeby's voice trembled with fury and heartbreak. Ecot collapsed to her knees. "Please, Ma, I'm sorry. It's not what you think. It was the devil's work." "The devil's work?" Mrs. Reeby's voice cracked. "I trusted you. I was good to you. Why my child, Ecot? Because he couldn't speak. You evil witch." She spat out the words, her eyes brimming with tears. Ecot sobbed on the floor. "I swear, Ma, I didn't hurt him like that. I have HIV, but I didn't do anything that would infect him. I just played with him. It wasn't me. It was the devil." Mrs. Reeby's mind raced, her shock deepening. HIV? What had she exposed her son to? She clenched her fists, fury coursing through her veins. "If I test my child and I find anything..." "You won't. I swear you won't, Ma," Ecot interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "If I wanted to hurt him, I could have, but I didn't. You were good to me. I just played with him." The police soon arrived and took Ecot away for her crimes. As the officers led her out, Mrs. Reeby collapsed beside her son, holding him close. Tears flowed freely as she whispered, "I'm so sorry, Jeffrey. I'm so sorry for all the times I wasn't there, for all the pain I caused by being absent. I'm here now, and I'll never leave your side again." That night, Mrs. Reeby stayed by Jeffrey's side as the doctors ran a series of tests. By morning, she fell to her knees, overwhelmed with relief. Jeffrey had not been infected, just as Ecot had said. Through sobs, she begged God for forgiveness, for her blindness, for her failure as a mother, for all the moments she had prioritized everything else over her own son. She made a vow to be better, to be present. Mrs. Reeby stepped away from her company, delegating her responsibilities to someone else. Her obsession with work no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered now was Jeffrey. She dedicated herself to being the mother he had always needed, cooking for him, cleaning for him, caring for him. And for the first time in years, she found joy in the simple, everyday acts of motherhood. They brought her more happiness than all the financial success she had once chased so relentlessly. Jeffrey, too, began to heal. His mother's presence was a balm to his wounded spirit, and with time, his courage grew. He was enrolled in a new school, one that promised to nurture him as he continued his journey to recovery. And as Mrs. Reeby watched her son struggle to overcome his trauma, she silently vowed that she would always be by his side, no longer just his protector, but his biggest advocate, his fiercest supporter, and most of all, his mother. As Jeffrey walked through the school's corridor for the first time, he felt a flutter of hope in his chest. He hoped that this new world would be kinder to him, that it wouldn't judge him for the scars he bore, both visible and invisible. He prayed that when people saw him, they would focus, not on his stammering words or his hesitant steps, but rather on the strength of his heart. He prayed for kindness, for compassion, for a world that would accept him as he was. Because that was indeed what Jeffrey needed the most now. Not pity, not avoidance, but love, understanding, and the freedom to be seen for more than the pain he had endured. The world, Jeffrey realized, was imperfect, often cruel. But he also understood now that healing was possible, that love could rebuild what had been shattered. He carried the weight of his story with him, but he also carried hope. Hope for a better future, and hope that the people he would meet would not just see his scars, but his very big heart and the resilience within his spirit. The story teaches us a crucial lesson to always watch over our little ones. It informs us on the dangers of leaving little children alone with strangers for too long. These stories are real-life related, and most of these accidents can be avoided, if only we would be more careful and pay more attention. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment on this story. Until we meet again, stay blessed, dear family, and I'll see you in our next story.